I think we're going to go ahead and get rolling. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. It's presented by the Neurodivergent ERG here at Elation. I know this is a busy time of year for all of us, with, post-summit and a quarter coming up. So I want to thank everyone who, took the time to show up today. This session, like I said, is being recorded for viewing later and will likely be posted to YouTube later this week as well for external sharing purposes. So my name is Daniel Herman. I'm going to be your presenter today. So why are we here today? What are we talking about? Neurodiversity in Business partnered with Rolls-Royce, McDonald's, and Sage to sponsor a study by the Birkbeck University of London to assess the current status of neurodivergent employees and neuroinclusion in the workplace. This report is over 60 pages of charts, statistics, and information that, while I find very interesting, may come off as dry to a lot of people. So today I'm going to do everyone a favor and give you all a summary instead. So as you can see on the slide, the agenda is going to kind of go as follows. We'll get a bit of background and context on the survey itself, why it exists, who took it. After that, we'll focus on the state of neurodivergent employees, as well as careers and turnover. And then last is the employer perspective before we go into some wrap up. And like I said, I plan to leave some time for Q&A as well. So go ahead and use the Slido link either here or in the chat that Katrina has posted. Start typing. So before we dive in, I'm just going to go over a little bit of terminology that is going to be commonly used in this presentation. So neurodiversity refers to the breadth of human cognitive functioning, including both those whose cognition is typical and atypical. Neurodivergent, or also going to be referred to in this presentation as ND, means differing in mental or neurological function from what is considered typical or normal. Neurotypical, or NT, is not displaying atypical patterns of thought or behavior. And then neurotype describes the different conditions. For example, dyslexia is a neurotype, ADHD is a neurotype. So you'll probably hear that pop up a lot over the course of this presentation. So for real, let's get going. So first of all, let's establish who Neurodiversity in Business, or NIB, is and why they commissioned a study. If you were on April's autism presentation, then you have probably heard me talk about them before. They are a London-based charity devoted to making the workplace more inclusive to neurodivergent people. As of now, they've worked with over 500 companies around the world, building better industry practices, and doing a study helps fuel and kind of guide their efforts to make sure they're making the most of everything. So why do a survey? One of the biggest reasons to do a survey can be found here in this quote from Judy Singer. For those of you who may not know, Judy Singer is the psychologist who pioneered the concept of neurodiversity. So she's somewhat of a big deal. She's also from Australia, if I believe that's where she's from. As you can see, people are now pretty aware that neurodivergence is a thing, but there is very little modern data about it. That has not stopped many companies and individuals from claiming they are experts in neuroinclusion or have strong neuroinclusive policies. And this survey is meant to provide some clarity and help people start to evaluate what works and doesn't. Along this line, again, as I've said in previous presentations, I'm not an expert. I am just someone who absorbs lots of information and is able to share it in summarized form. Everything I learn, I try and find from credible sources along the way. So why does this matter to Elation? We've been awarded the best place to work over and over again. Well, first, I think we, of all people, can appreciate the value of data. Second, effective and inclusive culture is going to be key to Elation's continued success and growth. We want to recruit and build the best talent, and part of that is going to come from understanding the strengths and needs of those who are neurodivergent. So let's stop talking about why the survey exists and get some lineage on where this data comes from. This is a UK-based survey, but its findings are still largely applicable to the US as well. Over 1,100 people were surveyed, 990 of them were employees, 127 were representing employers. All of the conditions we most commonly associate with neurodiversity were represented with a strong bias towards ADHD and autism. But that being said, the majority of respondents have also reported having more than one diagnosis, which isn't very surprising. Also unsurprising was the high level of participation from women, which is, again, very common in surveys in general. There is also a high percentage of people who identify as LGBTQ+, which again is also unsurprising because there is a strong correlation between ND and LGBTQ+ identities that is fairly well known. So let's get started into some of the actual results of the survey. So these results are self-reported, meaning that this is what ND employees believe their strengths and challenges are. The high number of ADHD and autistic respondents does skew this somewhat, but the averages have been weighted accordingly, so we can still be certain of what is statistically significant. As we can see, creativity, hyperfocus, innovation, detail processing are among the most commonly reported strengths. One that I love to see is that 64.4% who report authenticity as a strength. Really love to see that. The challenges also follow pretty standard norms as well, but there are some more specific challenges related to specific neurotypes, such as literacy, numeracy, and fine motor control being more prevalent in those with dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dyspraxia, respectively. Notice that looking after your mental health is the highest challenge here. We're gonna see that pop up more later. So adjustments. There was a chart for this, but it was huge and it was more text and numbers than visual. So I figured it would be better to just summarize most of the section for you. As you can see, fewer than expected employees have formal adjustments in place, meaning that they specifically requested or were provided those adjustments as an additional benefit of their employment. More commonly, we saw a lot of informal adjustments, meaning they're just available to everyone without your needs needing to be disclosed. Adjustments were grouped into three categories: environment and procedures, specialist work strategy coaching, and assistive technology. One note is that we know what is provided, we don't really know the quality of it. So we don't know the quality of the coaching or the software. We also saw that adjustments were more common in smaller organizations than larger ones. I kind of get that change is easier at a smaller size, but I thought that the resources available at larger companies might actually make up that gap. Turns out that's not the case. So continuing more in adjustments, it's no surprise that people like adjustments. Environmental and procedure changes were rated the highest, such as flexible scheduling, working from home, thanks pandemic for that one, and adjusting noise and lighting. Coaching was seen as more useful, but this is also slightly skewed because of well-being coaching being more generally available than coaching for, say, like organization or memory issues, things like that. Well-being coaching in general had mixed reviews because it's kind of a coin toss on whether or not that particular coaching is going to take neurodivergent needs and concerns into account. The ability to get tailored adjustments is also low, and less than half even have access to a person they need to talk to about tailoring. Again, put another pin in this because tailoring is going to come back very soon. So disclosing neurodivergence is a mountain that a lot of organizations are only beginning to climb. It is the most likely way to get adjustments, the adjustments that we need, but there are a lot of barriers that ND people face in the workplace. Fear of stigma and discrimination are unsurprising at the top here. There is also a pattern of support not being available or inadequate, either due to the structures or not existing, or staff not being educated or supportive of neurodivergent needs. These barriers are a huge problem that, you guessed it, will make an appearance later. Before I move on, there's something that really kind of stood out to me, which is that 18.2% that say they didn't have a formal diagnosis, and that's a barrier for them to disclose. Personally, I mentioned this before in the April autism webinar, that diagnoses are expensive and they take time to schedule and perform. In my opinion, that shouldn't even be a barrier. And ND people have often done most of the work to identify themselves beforehand, and the diagnosis only serves as a formalized confirmation of what they already know. There's lots of ways to go about fixing this particular barrier, but I'm going to save that conversation for a later time, because if I get on this soapbox, you will have to pull me off. Now, these are some direct responses from people surveyed about how these barriers have affected them. We can't just ask people to get over their fears when there are real consequences for some. 35 of the people who were surveyed are either out of work, on leave, or have opted for early retirement due to neurodivergent related conflicts. While this number is not huge in a group of 1,000, it's not small either. It's evidence why policies preventing discrimination, as well as clear and safe lines of communication for disclosure, are important. Otherwise, when employees see one of their colleagues not being supported, the fear of disclosing and asking for support can spread, and all of a sudden no one's taking advantage of any services, and things can just kind of fall apart. So mind you, educated line managers, while important and desired, are not as important or desired as a line manager who is supportive. Being willing to learn is more important than knowing everything. Now there's a give and take there that we'll kind of talk about a bit more later, but being supportive, very valuable. Now we're going to switch to more about how neurodivergent people are feeling about their workplaces, careers, and how they're just feeling in general. Some of those pinned conversations I mentioned before are going to be coming back. So historically, neurodivergent employees have struggled to climb the ladder, reaching kind of a glass ceiling around early management. We still see neurodivergent employees underrepresented in senior management. Some ideas kind of put this on job design and talent management, others on stigma related to what makes for good upper management. The results here show that career development and promotion are very common frustrations for neurodivergent employees overall. So with intent to leave, as anyone from HR or recruiting could probably tell you, replacing someone is expensive, and it comes with a lot of hidden costs. You can see here that and the employees said you can see what their intention was in the next 12 months. The extremes on either side kind of create this saggy graph in the middle, but what it tells us is that neurodivergent employees are sure one way or another whether or not they're staying or going. Notably, people with certain neurotypes or more than one condition were more likely to leave than others. Age and LGBTQ identity had little effect on the intent, but turnover was far more likely among the non-white respondents. Intent to leave could also be correlated with other experience variables. The worse the experience, you can kind of fill in the blanks from there. So you remember how I said that tailored adjustments would come back? Well, good for you, have a cookie. Now, like I said before, very few people had tailored adjustments in place, 12% highly tailored and 37% with some tailoring. Well, just look at the difference it makes. People with tailored adjustments are 3 times more likely to stay in their current positions. Heck, even just off-the-shelf adjustments with no personalization was better than no adjustments, period. People want to be heard. They don't just want to be helped, you know. I think that this graph is one of, the most powerful in the entire report. But we're here to talk about the whole report, so I'm not going to linger on this too much. But before we proceed, I kind of want to hear from you. We just talked about how much adjustments matter but from these options that I've put here, what do you think has the most influence on neurodivergent employee intent to leave? Use Slido to put in your thoughts, and we'll see who is right, who is dead, or I guess just less right, for the Princess Bride fans out there. All right, so I'm seeing pretty even answers. Okay, staff support. Staff support, psychological safety.
we tune down the music a tiny bit, please?
Yep.
It's the tempo's getting up and it's
Yeah, see, I don't control that.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
A tiny bar. All right, is that better?
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
I couldn't quite hear you, Katrina. Was that better?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so coming back, psychological safety leading the pack pretty hard. Interesting. All right, so no one said career satisfaction, staff support, psychological safety, boss support, and tailored adjustments. All right, some interesting results here. Well, let's actually find out. Surprise twist. It's career satisfaction. Adjustments are hugely important, and so is support, but the two biggest factors are safety and satisfaction. Not really surprising, since both of these are on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, although I'm equating career satisfaction with self-actualization in that case. Safety can also be impacted by things like adjustments and support, but also compounded by other factors like racism, sexism, all the isms, etc. So we need to view that through more of an intersectional lens. This importance of career satisfaction, though, tells us something very big, that neurodivergent people don't just want to be helped with their challenges. They want to be appreciated for their skills and strengths, to have their differences and unique traits valued. It's something that I think everyone can get behind, neurodivergent or not. So I guess this really shouldn't be so surprising, but it was fun to label it surprise twist anyway. So also making a comeback for well-being, the neurodivergent employee well-being is generally pretty low. Keep in mind that the timing of this survey is just post-pandemic, which is rough. As in the post-pandemic was rough, but even a score this low, even with that in consideration, is still pretty low. Also, again, we see that not all neurotypes are feeling the same either. Some are better than others. Just as before, satisfaction and safety were correlated with well-being, as one could easily see coming. But here is where supportive and knowledgeable staff pull ahead of adjustments. Neurodivergent people want a sense of community and a place where they belong, rather than just being helped but isolated. Going back to the different neurotypes for a moment, there were also interesting trends in their responses. ADHD in general had significantly lower experiences because the contemporary workplace can be overwhelming with constant notifications, meetings, and socialization that cut into productivity. But the problem with ADHD is just the lack of data around how to support that neurotype specifically in the workplace. The research just isn't there. Autistic and dyscalculic neurotypes lower levels of satisfaction, safety, and well-being, but experience the greatest improvement from adjustments and supportive managers and teammates. Dyslexic neurotypes overall fared better than most other neurotypes, which might be attributed to over 30 years of established research, as well as considerable inclusion initiatives and technological advancement in certain softwares that can help be adjustments for dyslexic employees. So now we're going to get into how the employers are approaching all of this. What do they know about neurodivergence in their companies? How are they identifying and supporting the ND community? What are their opinions on ND strengths, adjustments, and how are they going about educating themselves? So what employers do we see here? Again, more women than men. Also, several of them identify as neurodivergent. The tech sector also is overrepresented here, but considering that Elation is a tech company, that should only make these results more relevant for us. Oops, wrong button. There we go. So how are organizations identifying neurodivergent employees? The survey focused on intent to leave and well-being because they are good indicators of psychological safety and can be used as predictors for productivity and performance. Companies understanding the makeup of their ND employee mix is also crucial to being able to access these same insights and make adjustments in policy. There are some barriers to collecting this information. As I understand, people cannot be forced to identify, even directly asked to do so in the US. pretty sure it's the same in the UK. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. As such, self-disclosure being the primary method for companies, self-disclosure is the primary method for companies to understand their ND makeup, as long with other alternatives being, anonymous surveys and building identification into selection and induction. If anybody from talent management is in chat, I'd be interested to know what they think that means, because I'm a little interested in how you would build identification into selection and induction, what that would look like. As you can see on the right, less than half of the company respondents knew the prevalence of neurodivergence in their organization, and even less in turnover. So generally, we see that the companies that are taking neurodiversity seriously are seeing lower turnover, and many were able to share good examples of how they support their ND employees. Informal accommodations were by far the most popular, but many are taking inclusive recruiting and job design seriously. When it comes to inclusive recruiting and that kind of stuff, there is another study that this report refers to around neuroinclusive recruiting. So maybe that'll be something we cover in the future when I muscle up the spoons to absorb another brick of information. Overall, these themes listed here kind of show that a holistic approach across multiple levels of the org is beneficial. Who knew? So where are employees going to find all these nice programs when they do exist? Line managers, to no one's surprise, are the most agreed upon resource, which is further evidence for the need to educate managers on working with and supporting neurodivergent employees. However, this is where the similarities end. Most employers were more confident in other sources of support, such as HR and internal resources like DEI, than employees were. Employers also rated themselves more favorable when it came to how supportive they are of neurodiversity and how knowledgeable they are about it. However, there is an interesting hypothesis for this difference that we're going to get to in the next slide. But before that, I just want to do a quick check-in. Where do you think people get most of their information about neurodivergence? This can be your opinion or where you get your info personally. This is also my water break, okay? Since I've been talking for so long. Internet. Sister, media, life experience, social media. It's the NDERG iteration used to be the internet only. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. We're doing our best here. YouTube. Neurodivergent friends and family. Doctor, that's good to see. TV. All right. So yeah, overall, we can see that 90% of these sources are online, and the rest are, either people with lived experiences or we see a medical professional and the ERG here at Elation. So good to see. Now, what we can see in this chart is there is a large difference in where neurodivergent employees get their info versus where employers do. Employees tend to rely more heavily on the internet, online groups, and lived experiences. Not really surprising. This is where I have gotten a lot of my info in the past. But the info on the internet isn't regulated or often fact-checked. This is why this survey exists, like I said at the beginning. But this is because algorithms tend to show us stuff that we already agree with or will probably like, creating kind of the potential for confirmation bias and misinformation. Personally, what I try and do to avoid this is cross-checking any answer across multiple sources before drawing a conclusion. But again, it's the internet, so more mixed results there. But why does this matter to that slide I mentioned before about the confidence of organizations rating themselves higher on knowledge? It's because employers often have access to wider networks of resources and are more likely to blend, say, like professional resources with lived experience and advocacy advice. That being said, the internet still has a huge role to play because it shows the current trends, it amplifies those voices, and also shows kind of the changes in languages and understanding that moves a lot more rapidly than professional sources do. So kind of really, this is where the report mentioned that ERGs come in. They can kind of act as that middle ground, partnering with HR to curate knowledge from both sides, and also accounting for the variety and needs across neurotypes. Because for me specifically, I am ADHD and autistic. And I was just talking with other neurotypes earlier today about I don't understand the needs of things like dyslexia and stuff like that, and I want to learn more. As part of this ERG, how do we do that? So that's kind of a critical conjunction that comes from that kind of blended approach. So our ERG adulation is still fairly new, but I would love to see us kind of continue to grow as that go-between role as organizer and curator. So that way, we can make sure that the right advice and the right information is ending up in the hands it's going to be the most beneficial for. So what stops organizations from implementing things like adjustments, training, or partnering with and supporting ERGs? Is it cost? No, it's disclosure and education. This partly shows a lack of engagement from employers. They're not seeking out how to be inclusive, but rather waiting for the need to come to them and then adjusting if at all. But at the same time, it also shows that we can't neurodivergent employees. It's on us to voice needs as well. Now, given the importance of line managers in this whole process, it is worrisome to see that there is a number of managers that are doubting that adjustments are even helpful, or worse, are a sign of favoritism. Prejudice needs to be transparently addressed, especially since ND employees are commonly more vulnerable to being ostracized due to difficulties in social communication and interaction. This makes education one of the biggest steps in building a more neuro-inclusive workplace. Some companies have already engaged with building out awareness training. It's also great to see that they're sourcing it from so many places. One thing that this survey noted that I love is that certain trainings and sources serve different purposes. Lived experience and internal trainings are key to change attitudes, while experts help change behaviors. Both are very essential to moving forward. And so definitely it's something we're going to, we as an ERG, as well as we as Elation as a company, need to be thinking about as we move forward. So most employers have a DEI policy, but that number drops to half when asked if that policy mentions disability specifically, and half again for any focus on neurodivergence. And while employers are confident that they can support individuals in general well-being, their confidence in managing change, exiting, or career development is much weaker. And needless to say, we already know how important career development is to this neurodivergent community. As far as perspective on strengths, overall, we see a lot of agreement on what strengths neurodivergent employees have, with some small differences in skills like memory, working with numbers. But what I love to see most from this section is this quote that shows exactly what the business benefit of an empowered neurodivergent workforce is. Loyalty, low turnover, and unique perspectives that extend the company's reach and capability. One of the things that this quote mentions, especially in the second half, is having ND people working on our marketing, for example, understanding what works to aid dyslexic people reading our posts, providing image descriptions, which helps those who are neurodivergent as well as visually impaired. Things like this, having those diverse perspectives, it's going to extend Elation's reach and capability going forward. So this has been a ton of information. Thank you to those of you who have stuck with me this far. Before we get to Q&A, I just kind of want to give a quick summary of some of the key things we learned from the report, as well as action items for different levels of the organization. Mind you, not all these action items are going to be specific to Elation. And they might also refer to things that are already in progress or are things that are on the horizon. So keep that in mind. So what are the key insights that I gleaned from this report? Recognizing strengths and creating clear career paths to harness them while making accommodations is key. While addressing needs is critical, career progression and inclusive job design are the biggest factors that contribute to retention of neurodivergent employees, as well as just general retention. Adjustments are appreciated and helpful, and attitudes around them need adjustment. They are relational, not transactional. It's not an exchange of goods and services. Employees don't want a menu of services. They want to feel heard and valued. That's where we see that how that tailoring makes a difference. The co-occur the reason is that general adjustments for one neurotype might not help someone who has like a co-occurrence. Like I said, I have ADHD, I'm also autistic. And so that creates interesting scenarios where an adjustment for ADHD is actually going to conflict with my autistic traits and stuff like that. Or, there might be an adjustment that works with both and is even more effective, but that's where tailoring needs to kind of come into that conversation. There is a high intersectionality between neurodivergent people and other groups. Neurodivergent people of color, women, non-binary, and LGBTQ plus experience are going to face compound impacts from many decisions. So they especially need to be included when designing policy. Most barriers are knowledge-based and struggle due to the low regulation of the internet and the lack of advice from legal bodies. This kind of creates confusion in who to support and how, and it can end up reinforcing stigmas and prejudice. We don't just need info, we need to change hearts and minds as well. Line managers are going to be key to success, but they need support, training, and reliable advice in how to do that. Like we said, supportive staff are key to a lot of neurotypes. Knowledgeable staff are key to, kind of the knowledgeable and supportive is the total end goal there. So from there, what are some of the action items that I would recommend? From organizations, create uniform ways of addressing ND prevalence and turnover data. This data would kind of then become a benchmark that an organization, Elation or otherwise, could come back to and highlights where the need for change is going to be greatest. Create opportunities for ND employees to work with decision makers on policy. No conversation about us without us. That's probably a pretty familiar statement to a lot of different ERGs and groups. Implements neuroinclusive job design and career pathways. So finding ways to measure, develop, and celebrate neurodivergent strengths such as creativity and innovation, and kind of changing our perspective around what are good management skills, rather than just relying on what we consider a good manager in the past when we look at new perspectives, new ideas. The organization needs to empower and educate line managers to triage, offer, and refer support to their workers. Like I said, line managers are the agreed upon #1 contact source for support around neurodivergence. So they need to be the people getting the most help to empower this change. They are going to be the tip of the spear on any movement. The action items for neurotypical employees and managers. Adjustments are not transactional. Make sure you tailor them where you can. Co-occurrence being a strong case for this, as I just said on the last slide. Be advocates for your reports and coworkers. Seek out education as well as learning about your colleagues' lived experiences. Show that you're a person that people can unmask to and seek out as support. Line managers, again, super key here. And again, like something that was mentioned a lot in the report was that managers are afraid of getting it wrong, which, if you're afraid of getting it wrong, well done. That's step one. You care enough to not get it wrong. But at the same time, like, no one's going to be upset at you for getting it wrong, because at least you tried. It's if you get it wrong and then say, how can I do better? That's perfect, because that's that growth mindset. That's listen like you're wrong. That's an elation value. But you got to move the ball forward. You can't just listen like you're wrong. You got to move the ball forward. So it's kind of bringing it back to those values. Help your reports develop and understand career goals and develop them to achieve them. I know career pathing is something that's been announced and is coming, but we don't have to wait for it. Employees can start talking about, this is where I think I'm good. These are the strengths I want to develop. And as a line manager or as a colleague, you can kind of, point out like, I think you're good at this, or I've noticed that you have a lot of passion for this. You can start those informal conversations now. You don't have to wait for formalized documents for it. Although formalized documents also great, but do stuff where you can. Don't underestimate the informal adjustment. Like we said, things like the flexible work scheduling. I know that ERG has brought up things like possibly doing like body doubling. Trying to figure out like what are the things that we can do that don't require me to do much more than acknowledge it or say, yeah, you can do that. You can work a little bit different. You can work different hours, or you can, take notes on meetings and go camera off or something like that. Informal adjustments like that don't require documentation, they are very, very powerful and they make a huge difference. But of course, I don't want to leave out the neurodivergent employees. We have a role to play in this as well. We can't just wait for things to happen. Be your own advocate. Self-disclosure is, and probably will always be, the best chance you have to get the help you need at a moment. That being said, disclose at your own pace and only what you feel comfortable. No one is going to force you to do anything. Come to your line managers with solutions if possible. Don't just say like, oh man, I have a really hard time, starting my day at 8 a.m. That really sucks. Instead, maybe come with like, hey, it's hard for me to start my day at 8 a.m. Can I start it at 9:30 or something like that? And just work a bit later. Come with a solution and kind of work with them in that. Don't just put that on the land manager, because that pressure is also going to be, it's going to be hard for them to be the tip of the spear if they're also being put under the same amount of pressure. Just as I encourage the employees in the organization to develop career goals, you can also do your own research on career development, stuff like that. Here at Elation, Katrina has been doing some stuff on career development, some great stuff that I've already started taking away from and trying to apply to my own kind of career pathing vision. So there are resources out there for you to start that journey on your own, as well as getting support from others. Find and build relationships with your ND community and allies. Join an ERG. We have a great one here. At least I'm tooting my own horn a little bit. Share your concerns and needs with others, because that's going to be the best way that an ERG and other neurodivergent people are going to understand what you are specifically struggling with and what we need to advocate for. Find spaces to unmask. This is a hard one. Unmasking is something that a lot of neurodivergent people, we have to unlearn. Once we discover our diagnosis, we have to actively try and unlearn how to unmask and unlearn behaviors and stuff like that. But finding spaces at work where you can not have to keep that on is going to be key, especially to this next point, which is looking after your mental health. Burnout is no joke. It happens to everyone. Don't force yourself to try and meet neurotypical standards. You have different cognition. You need to kind of acknowledge that and embrace your strengths. If that's going to be, you have a different working schedule or you have different tasks and skills that are energizing and things like that, you kind of need to be your own master and commander of your own mental health as best you can. With that, we're going to kind of move over to Q&A. Thank you everyone who's stuck around this long. Obviously upvote any questions you see that upvote any questions you see, and yeah. So who at Elation HR should we talk to about accommodation adjustments or issues that might be impacting performance? Katrina, do you know the answer for that one?
I absolutely can help out. So first of all, Daniel, thank you so much for this incredible session. I love the way that you structured that, and I have taken away so many actions. And I think one action relates directly to this. So please do reach out to your HR business partner if you do want to discuss anything around accommodations or adjustments, to find out information for yourself, for people on your team, obviously if you're a manager in that case. But please do also come and speak to me as a co-lead for this ERG and neurodivergent myself. I have gone through this process myself in my career in previous workspaces. So either speak to me or your HR business partner, I would say, is probably the best point of call.
Awesome. Daniel, for you, what's the one most significant thing you learned from this report? I would say it's that we don't just want to be accommodated, we want to be valued. Which, again, like I said, when you say it out loud, it sounds so obvious, but so much of neurodivergent literature, especially on the internet, is around adjustment, is around accommodation, and stuff like that. There is not a ton of literature or studies even being done on how to take advantage of those strengths, how our organization, it's a lot of like, okay, let's support the challenge and here's the strengths, but there's not a lot of actual like specifics on how to take advantage of those strengths, how do I value those, how do I express value for those things. And I think that's the number one thing I kind of want to change about my own view of the ERG. Is not just going to be here's support services for your accommodations, it's here's how we can take advantage of strengths, here is how we can move the ball, move that neurodivergent ball forward. Next question, how can we best support our neurodivergent coworkers? Express support is great. Just say, hey, I know that you're neurodivergent, and what's your experience and how do I support you? Start that conversation. Because again, I can give you some generalized guidelines, but again, every person's lived experience is different, especially, like I said, for those people who have more than one condition, people who have ADHD and anxiety, or who have autism and depression, or autism and ADHD and depression and anxiety, like there were respondents in this survey who have as many as 6 to 8 different neurodivergent diagnoses. So really, and how those, how that interacts for people, I have no idea. Because again, I have 2.5-ish, 3 kind of things, if you count synesthesia, that kind of affect me. So my lived experience is going to be different from someone who has ADHD and anxiety, because I don't have anxiety. So it's very, the best thing you can do is say, I want to be supportive of you. What's your lived experience and how do I support that? I think that's the best way, is start the conversation. Latest question, for ADHD employees, can changing the manager's feedback approach, such as incorporating more positive reinforcement, can be classified as adjustment? I'd say that falls under informal adjustment. When it comes to the feedback approach, there's this thing, especially for ADHD, that I love kind of circulating whenever I get the chance. It's called INCUP, which is it's different methods of motivating a ADHD. It's incentive, novelty, challenge, and pressure. So those are 4 different ways that especially ADHD people can experience that dopamine rush that they're lacking to get that work done. Incentive being like, here's a reward for finishing this task or this project or whatever. Novelty is do it in a different way, do it in a different place, make it new. Here's a different kind of task that you may not normally do. Challenge is make it a competition or make it competitive or challenging in some way. Like, again, that can come in a lot of ways. Pressure is deadlines. The reason we hear one of the most common memes I see around ADHD is about how people finish projects the day before they're done, is pressure. That pressure is a motivator. Ways I've kind of gamified my own, that pressure factor is I give myself multiple deadlines for stages of a project and stuff like that. And that's how I end up not doing a project the day before it's due. This deck being an exception, I spent most of the day on it yesterday because I procrastinated. So I am not free from making those terrible decisions either. Yeah, that's all the questions I see here. Any other comments, questions, concerns that anybody would like to share? You feel free to come off mute if you'd like. Well, your silence is very reassuring.
I have a quick question, Dandy. Is there any plans to incorporate something like, I mean, this presentation was amazing, Daniel, so thank you so much for doing this. Are there any plans to incorporate this into like manager training? I guess, because I think you emphasized multiple times how important the line manager is. And I've been managing for a long time and I've never had like this level of visibility into neurodivergence, which I had earlier in my career. So, I mean, any thoughts on that?
It's like I said, it's definitely become like this report is, for me, adjusted kind of like what I saw as like the next 3-4 months of what the neurodivergent ERG was going to be doing. This has kind of adjusted my ideas for what I think, we're going to be advocating and moving forward. I think internally, we've talked about, we're talking about things internal to the neurodivergent ERG. We're talking about things like unmasking, disclosing, things like that, which I think are great topics that we need to continue to talk about. I think manager training, which was kind of like, we were like, oh, we could maybe get to that, H1 of 2025 or something like, or Q1 of 2025. I think for me, I'm gonna see if there's ways we could even get started on some kind of manager, even some intro manager content or stuff like that, or like a reading list, even as early as late Q3 or Q4. So I would say it has shifted my priorities as a co-lead in the ERG significantly.
Can I just
even just watching this? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Andy. I love that you've asked this question, and given the fact that I'm in the talent management space and support our manager training and manager development or leadership development, I just want to say absolutely. We're just trying to figure out how we best get this to managers, and we share recordings like this on the managers Slack channel. Obviously, our HR business partners have coaching conversations one-on-one with the leaders and the managers they speak to, but I think it's definitely at some point going to be the case where we want to get Daniel and obviously our other ERGs in to speak with our managers, maybe in smaller forums as well, to have conversations as well as these kind of training sessions. But I'm so pleased that this has had an impact on you, and I'll definitely be contacting you, Andy, to get your support on how you think we could best do that and get the attention of our manager community really around this, because it's so important.
Happy to help.
I'm definitely glad that all of you kind of took the time to attend. This webinar was the result of a lot of work, a lot of reading. Kind of like the hardest part for me about this project was trimming it down to what gets. Do you get a slide? Do you get a slide? Do you how long can I spend on this? Because like I said, there were plenty of points on this where I could have gotten on a soapbox and had to be pulled off. So I definitely would encourage any of you who aren't already part of the Neurodivergent Elation Slack channel. Feel free to join us there. We do have a survey on that channel that we were using to try and get some idea into what is the makeup of our neurodivergent community, what neurotypes do we most need to support. Again, this particular report focused a lot on neurodivergence at the workplace. I wanted to also kind of stress that our ERG is also for caretakers of neurodivergent children. So if you have children who are neurodivergent or family members who are neurodivergent, anything like that, that space is also for you. I think something we're going to try and do in the future as well, as we're moving manager training forward, is where we have one of our co-leads is a caretaker to neurodivergent people. We'd love to have him speak on, on that caretaker's perspective and stuff like that. As much as I love the limelight, I want to share it. I also recommend, you can follow Neurodiversity in Business on LinkedIn. They have great content there as well as on their website. They have a litany of resources